button. And Mr. Hoskins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Medley. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I was honored that you thought highly enough of me to ask me to do this. So I'm going to try not to embarrass you or your dad and give an honest representation today for the topic at hand. First, I would say that too many people, too many young people in particular, don't learn enough about money, either in school or at home. And this has a negative outcome for people as they get older. And I see it every day in my everyday life among my peer group, as well as with those that I work with in various ways. And so the question is, why does it matter? What is the so what? The so what is the goal for financial savvy planning and preparedness is to put yourself on a solid financial footing for your future. I saw in the program that many of you had to review in preparation for today that they talked about a spending plan in lieu of budgeting. And while I'm not going to delve too deeply in that, I would augment that just a little bit by saying you should incorporate a strategy of paying yourself first. I'll repeat that, paying yourself first. It's a novel concept, but one that if you incorporate it early in life, you'll put yourself in a position to have flexibility down the road. And I'll speak a little bit more to that as I get further into the presentation. But the main thing you have going for you right now is time. Time afforded to you because you are young. And time without taking action, though, is what I guess we call procrastination. And if you procrastinate, time will begin to work against you. And I have a real world example that I want to share with you in a few moments to kind of give some credence to that concept. It's hard to tell in this virtual environment in which we're in. If we were in a live setting, I would ask for a show of hands of how many people are planning to go to college, how many of those of you will be planning to pursue a career in the military, and then how many might be planning to start their journey in the world of work right now. Regardless, the steps that I want to talk about today are applicable. And it doesn't matter which path you choose to take. If you incorporate some of these fundamental goals in your life's plan, you'll find yourself in a much more solid position down the road. I like to level set, if I may, with a few keywords that I'll dig into and unpack a bit. The first word is delayed gratification. Here, the concept I'm talking about is quite simple. We turn the old adage on its head that said, why put off till tomorrow what you can do today? We like to say, let's put off until tomorrow. In fact, well into the future, some of the things that we can do today so that we can do them when we can most afford them, or we can make it a lot easier. What's great about this is that when you see your money begin to grow, this will take on a life of its own. The second concept I want to leave you with is living beneath your means. What am I talking about here? It's not taking a vow of poverty. Rather, it's finding a level in which you can meet your basic requirements and still kind of hover there for a moment. So as your income begins to increase, if you're still able to maintain that standard of living without increasing it to be commensurate with the income you're now taking, you are creating a gap or a delta. And that difference can then be used to further advance your savings plan. And again, the example I'm going to give you in a few minutes will help highlight the importance of that. The third concept is saving. I alluded to it earlier, paying yourself first. Means just as it sounds. With any income you receive, you want to get into the habit of allocating a portion of that to an account that you do not have ready access to. And I think in some of the advanced materials you looked at, it talked about automation. You can automate a portion of your income if you have direct deposit into your checking or savings account to be allocated to another account that's separate, that again will grow over time. Lastly, I want to entice you to learn to invest at an early age. This is an area that I would say probably paralyzes more young people than any other. I too was very confused when I was just coming out of college, starting my first job, and I was faced with an array of choices at my HR benefits meeting, and I had no clue as to which way to go, whether I wanted to invest in a mutual fund. If I did, which one? Did I want to do individual stocks? Again, I have no idea. Corporate bonds, what's that? Or finally, just put it in a tried and true US savings bond. I did know something about that. But the main point I want to make is that it's incumbent upon you, and I applaud you for taking the opportunity that's in front of you right now, to begin to invest not only in your financial future, but in yourself. And you can do that by learning now. And that's what this is all about. So let's put savings under the umbrella of investing, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're putting money aside for a period that in the future we'll be able to pull from that money. And the hope is that it will have grown over time to help fulfill our needs down the road. In essence, what we're trying to do is teach the strategy of gifting your future self. If you could for a minute imagine, I think there are a lot of phone apps now that you can age progress yourself, take a picture and see what you might look like. I think Madison used a picture that could somehow be a good demonstration of what I'm talking about. That was my young self. This is my little bit older self. And you want to try to have the older self, imagine what would the older self say to the young self. And I can tell you, being now an older self, that the older self is saying to you as a young person, invest, 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 and save, 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 because I'm going to need that money 10, 20, 30 years from now. And I need you to be disciplined about what you're doing, even though you can't really see the value add that you're creating for me in the future. So if you think about that for a minute, there are three important concepts to saving / investing. Number one is the amount of money you save or invest. Two is the time horizon over which that money has to work. And three, it's the rate of interest or the rate of return that is paid for the use of that money. Those three elements combine to create your future nest egg. And so with that, I want to try to illustrate for you a real world example. I'm sure someone in the group drinks coffee. I don't know if Starbucks is your fancy, but it's not cheap. And I would imagine one of those little poo-poo drinks with the, no judgment here, but one of those drinks with the whipped cream and stuff on top, and then they do the chocolate swirl and all of that. On average, it's about what, $5 or $6? If you were to take that $5 or $6, $5, let's call it, and save it every day for a month, and yes, I know the months vary in days, but let's just say we use 30.25 as the average number of days. You would have $151 at the end of the month. At the end of a year, if you were able to maintain that course, you'd have $1,815, I believe. So let's say we have three people. We have Olivia, Tony, and Paul. Olivia has heard this message and says to herself, I want to do that. I'm gonna try that and see if it really works, if it makes sense. I would tell you that if Olivia took the $5 a day and put it aside, accumulated it monthly, and at the end of the year, she had $1,815 to invest in an account that generated 5% rate of return. At the end of 5 years of doing that, 5 years, she would have $10,029 in her account. In 10 years, that money will grow to $22,829. And in 13 years, when Olivia is 30, that money would have grown to $32,149. So you say, okay, that sounds great. What's the big deal? It's only $5. I can do that anytime. So now let's take another imaginary person that I've created for this illustration, and that would be Tony. Tony was listening, but for whatever reason, he decided to put this off. And after all, it's only $5, like I said, and he can make this up anytime. So he really doesn't get serious about saving until he meets a girl he likes. He waits 8 years and doesn't start investing until he's 25. At the age of 25, he will need to invest $4,726 a year every year for 5 years just to have the same amount as Olivia. In fact, he will need to save $394 a month for 60 months in order to catch her. Remember, Olivia only had to save $151 a month, or about $37 a week. The truth of the matter is that as Olivia aged, in all likelihood, her income increased over time. And so that $37 a week, it became more and more negligible relative to her overall income. It was less of an impact on her daily livelihood. Now, can't say that so much so for Tony. Lastly, in the example, we have who I call the procrastinator in chief. This is Paul. Paul has dreams of being a music producer, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, he neglects to save even a modest amount of money for his future. Paul decides at the ripe age of 30 that he now needs to get started because life has gotten a hold of him, and he's now married and has a child on the way. Meanwhile, Olivia hasn't changed a thing. She's still investing her $1,815 a year, every year. And remember, at age 30, she already has $32,149. Paul has zero. So let's look forward 5 years. Olivia still adopting the same tried and true strategy. Her money has grown to a whopping $51,060. That's $5 a day. That's that coffee that she was getting at Starbucks. She started at the age of 18 and just maintained the course. And time, coupled with compound interest, which I'll speak about a little bit more in a second, has allowed her savings to grow and mature to over $50,000. Paul, starting at the age of 30, would have to save and invest $7,500 a year for 5 years to catch her. So from the age of 30 to 35, Paul would have to have $7,500 extra to put into an account just to catch Olivia. So now, what does that amount to? About $626 a month. That's a car payment, that's childcare, that's money that could go towards utilities and a mortgage. And the funny thing about life is that as you get older, your expenses increase, they don't get less. So the more you do now to salt away for your future, the better off you're going to be. One of the questions I had when I was going through this kind of mental gymnastics was, well, Ken, that sounds good. I like the message, but I just don't have an idea of how to get started. It's more than I have time to unpack here in this session today, but there are tons of resources, particularly now in this digital age, online, where you can begin to educate yourself I tell you what I did. I started with a subscription to Money Magazine. And although there are many terms in the magazine that I didn't know at the time, I just kept reading it. And the more I read it, the more things became familiar. So by the time I was in year 2 of my subscription, I found that the magazine began to repeat a lot of what they said, and I was able to start to pick up on the concepts. The second thing I did was I got a subscription to the Wall Street Journal. Talk about having your mind blown. Lots of information there. But once you start to learn how to unpack some of the financial jargon, things begin to become a little bit easier. And then finally, there's online. There are a ton of resources online for you to research, particularly with respect to what funds might make sense to invest in, what strategy do the funds incorporate. A good resource here is Morningstar. If you haven't heard of it, you could Google it. And as Tony Kornheiser likes to say, put it in your Google machine and you can easily get the reference point for Morningstar. And then there's another point I want to raise that many young people don't take advantage of early enough. If you are fortunate enough to gain employment with an employer that has a matching 401k, you want to take full advantage of that. What do I mean by that? Most employers will contribute money to your retirement up to a certain dollar amount, dollar for dollar. They will match you up to a certain limit. And if the limit, let's just say for the sake of discussion, is they will match the first $5,000 that you put in. You want to put in $5,000 so that you get 5 from them. So at the end of the year, you have 10. You don't want to shortchange yourself for short-term gratification by only putting in $2,500. You're leaving money on the table. So you don't want to make that mistake. Time is on your side here. A couple other concepts I want to bring up in the time I have. And Ms. Medley, please keep me on track, because once I get started talking about this stuff, I get enthusiastic about it and I can keep going. But you want to avoid excessive debt. Now, here you're at a crossroads in life. As I said, some of you may be going to college, some may be going in the military, some may be starting their careers. You're going to be enticed at this stage of life to get every credit card that is available. Credit card companies know this, and they strategically place themselves in your line of sight. And they dangle what seem like can't pass up enticements to get you to sign up for their card. They're trying to hook you early and make you a customer for life. If you want to see a living, shining example of the power of your dollar, your interest paid on borrowed money, all you need to do is go look at the headquarters of any major credit card company. We have one here in the Washington metropolitan area, Capital One in Tyson's Corner, immaculate building. Many people who hold a Capital One credit card has helped to pay for that. So you want to be savvy about how you entertain the use of credit and avoid getting excessively in debt. You want to also learn to be your own piggy bank. Again, by paying yourself first. There may be a time when you need some funds. It's great to have a resource that is your own, that you don't have to worry about paying interest on top of the money that you use. You want to create an emergency fund, and this is usually defined as 6 months of living expenses. There are ways in which you can calculate what your expenses are and put that money aside just in case something happens. You have ready access to it. Usually you put an emergency fund in a savings account, something that you have ready access to that's not subject to risk, so that when you need the money, it's there. Let me give you a real life example, because I was always one of those people who, when I would be in a forum like this and listening to a speaker, I'd always want to know, what was their story? Why should I listen to you? What is your credibility on this issue? here's my story. I went to college at Howard University, and while working my way through school, I was fortunate enough to win an academic scholarship. However, the real test came when I graduated. I lived at home for as long as I could after I graduated so I could save money, and I helped out around the house. My friends used to call me cheap because I had the first dollar I ever made. But I would tell you, do not worry about your friends. And I think there's an adage out there that goes something along the lines that haters are going to hate. That's what they do. Let them do that. You stay focused on the mission. And for me, my mission was I wanted to go to graduate school, and I needed to save to make sure I could afford it, regardless of what type of financial aid I was able to get. So that was my goal. By the time I was 25, I had saved over $50,000 with the goal, again, of going back to graduate school and doing what I said, living beneath my means. I could have gotten an apartment. I could have gotten a nice car. I could have done a lot of things with the income I was making for my first job, but I wanted more. And I wanted to put myself in a position to do that. So that was a sacrifice I was willing to make. And I wasn't too concerned with what other people had to say. I would also say, ask questions. This is what I did. I asked questions of a lot of people that I deemed to be successful. You want to be in a sponge mode here. A good question to ask if you don't know where to start is to ask the person, what would you do differently if you could start all over? You'll be surprised what nuggets of information you'll gain. You'll learn what pitfalls to avoid, and you'll be in a better position to make decisions going forward because you'll have a reference point. For me, what I learned, if you were to ask me that question, what would I do differently? I probably would have been more aggressive with respect to investing in the stock market because I had, again, the benefit of time on my side. Unfortunately, in my household, I was the first to go and graduate from college, and there just was not a lot of financial expertise within my household. So I only did what I knew, and that was a very conservative investment. So I stuck with bonds, and bonds don't grow as fast as stocks do. Likewise, they're not as risky either. So you have a trade-off there. But that's something I would have liked to have done if I had known better historically. I will go on to tell you that because of my savings and some research I had done, by the time I was 27, I bought my first house. And on top of that, I was going to graduate school full time. So imagine this, I'm 27 years old. I have enough money saved up to put down a down payment on a house, pay that house note for the 2 years that I was in school full time. That was the byproduct of doing things a little bit differently and learning as I went along, but having a mentality of saving and growing my income. What you do now will make a world of difference. And your old self, if it could talk to you, your old self could talk to you, would be screaming at you right now, telling you to do this. Because your old self is going to need every penny because life is getting more and more expensive. Finally, I would say, I asked my goddaughter, who is 35 now, what she wished she had known when she was 18 and about to embark on her life's journey. She said the following to me, and I thought it would be beneficial to pass it on to you. She said, student loans, student loans, student loans. Caveat emptor, in choosing your school and your major, try to apply to schools that have a tuition that's commensurate with your expected income, especially if you or your family take out a lot of debt to finance the education. The translation here is you may want to think about paying out-of-state tuition versus in-state tuition, or avoiding, I should say, avoiding out-of-state tuition if you can find a comparable school in-state. The differential in the expense may not be offset by the income you're likely to make. Also, she said this, you don't need to go to Harvard and incur a Harvard tuition only to start your career in a nonprofit field. Again, the idea is you're incurring a lot of debt and your income is here. So you have a built-in negative delta starting off. And it's hard to dig out of that hole because the student loans charge interest. And I mentioned the concept earlier of compound interest. Compound interest is interest on interest. So the more you don't pay, the credit card companies and the loan companies are fine with that. They just say, okay, we're going to charge you interest on what you haven't paid, plus the interest you already owed us. So you want to avoid that because the hole just continues to get deeper. The next thing she said was to save, invest, and repeat. Save and invest. She said, create a nest egg for emergencies. Again, 6 months worth of living expenses, so you don't have to use a credit card every time an emergency arises. And then she said, credit. I would tell them to use their credit wisely by paying off the amount owed at the end of the month, so they avoid paying twice for the thing they bought. And to protect their credit because it will determine the level of interest they're going to be charged in the future for really big purchases, like when you get ready to buy a car or your first home. The mortgage lender or the car company is going to look at your history. And if your history of paying back your creditors is shaky, they're going to charge you more because you're going to be deemed to be a higher risk. So all those things are important to think about the future consequences of the actions you're taking today. And lastly, she said, do not live above your means, develop a budget and stick to it. So with that, I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I don't want to be, I don't want to utilize too much time. So having said that, I think this is all that I want to say. And if we're doing a Q&A now or how that works, Ms. Medley, please let me know. But those are the main points I want to make.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hoskins. That was a really great presentation. Just as you said in your presentation, you said it was very important to ask questions. So we are now going to open the floor for any questions. You can ask him questions on the presentation he just gave, on anything that you've learned today. We ask that you put them in the chat. You can either private message me or Connor, or just put it in the open chat. Unless you're okay with having your voice or face recorded, you can ask it out loud. Okay, so let me currently look in the chat. Okay, so I got a private message here. The first question is, should you pay your largest debts first, or should you just let it accumulate?
So let's say you have 3 credit cards. And you have one that is 5,000, one that's 3,000, and one that's 2,000. My approach would be essentially this. You want to pay off your smallest first and take the money that you use to pay off the smallest and add it to the second and aggressively pay the second down. And then as soon as you get the second paid off, then take that accumulated money and put it on the third and then pay it down. In life, I've looked at doing it 2 different ways. Once when I was younger, I had multiple credit cards. I had a situation like that, and I put them in order of the amount of interest that was paid. What I've learned over time is that it's more beneficial to get the cards paid off as quickly as possible. So to take the lowest one first, it kind of gives you a sense of accomplishment psychologically, and then you can build on that momentum with the second.
So in that situation, what if you're still in a negative delta to the point where that amount of money, that the cost is growing and the amount of money that you're making won't be enough to pay it off?
Okay, so it sounds like in this situation you're talking about a case where the amount due every month is just so onerous that you can't get out from under it. Here, you can reach out to the credit card company and give them a call and ask them if they can defer your payment and see what they say. And that way you give yourself some room to take care of some of the smaller ones first and then tackle the larger one.
I have another question.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So my other question is, what are corporate bonds?
Corporate bonds are basically IOUs from the company. The company will borrow money from investors in the form of a bond. They have a payment upfront where you, as the investor, will, let's say you want to buy a bond for $1,000. The company is in effect borrowing $1,000 from you, and it's going to agree to pay you back what they call coupon payments. The coupon payments, depending on what the period of the bond is, the coupon payment will be periodic. And at the end of the term, they will give you back the last coupon payment plus the amount of money that they borrowed from you. So it's an IOU from the company.
Okay, I have another question in the chat here. You kind of touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but I think they want to go in a little more detail. The question is, should younger people open credit accounts if they don't have any outstanding debts or large purchases to make? What's the balance between establishing a good line of credit early on and not going into debt early?
Okay, that is it's an interesting question, one in which I would say is in the opinion of the person giving the answer. So in my opinion, I would advise that you get one and only one credit card and use it for purchases that, what I would like to say is that you don't want to pay interest on. If you have a car, that will be gas. So I would have a gas card. And every time I went to get gas, I would use that card and pay it off almost simultaneously if I have the resources to do so. The one thing you don't want to get into the habit of is paying interest on something that you've consumed and it's long gone. So imagine gas is one of those things. Going out to restaurants is another thing where people have consumed the meal and 3 months later, they're still paying interest on something they ate 3 months ago. That doesn't make good financial sense. So short answer, one credit card focused on immediate needs that you can pay off at month's end. That will help you build a credit score as well as avoid getting into sizable debt.
Mr. Hoskins, so I've heard of like selling stocks to other investors. Is it possible to rent out stocks as well? So if I have like stocks in Disney and another investor wants my stocks, could I rent it out to them for like limited time?
I'm not aware of a concept like that where you could do that personally. There is a concept within the stock market itself. It's called shorting a stock. And that's where an investor on one side of a trade will make a bet basically that a stock is going to go down. And so let's say you own 100 shares of Amazon and I am a short. I think Amazon, 100 shares of Amazon at, let's say 160 bucks. I think that's a little high. Market's a little rich, as they might say, and it's going to go down. I would go to my broker and say, I want to short 100 shares. My broker, acting as the middleman, would say, this gentleman over here has 100 shares. We're going to take those and give them to Mr. Hoskins. Mr. Hoskins, at the end of the period, has to give those back. So I'm making a bet that the stock is going to go down. At the end of the month, I close out the short sale and the stocks essentially go back to you. That is a way in which they are borrowed through a brokerage account. I am not aware of a situation where I, as an individual, can lend out my certificates to someone else.
Mr. Hoskins, I appreciate everything that you have been saying. It's been very informative. I really liked the way that you talked about other people's opinions on saving, because that's actually happened to me before. A lot of people are like, oh, you should get this, you save a lot, you should do this, you should do that. But at the end of the day, I feel like exactly like what you said, it's psychological, because when you hit a certain milestone for state saving, you're like, wow, I can do this. And then you just keep on going. So I liked how you touched on that point. But do you have any advice or specific stocks that you think new investors should get into?
Well, I would tell you it's out of my purview here, and I wouldn't be responsible if I were to do that. It would require a licensed professional, and although I used to be one, I'm not now, to sit down and have a conversation with you and understand your risk profile, your tolerance for risk, and to put together a long-term plan commensurate with that. So the best advice I could give you is that you can easily, I don't feel like I can't tell you this, I would say you could go to Charles Schwab or Merrill Lynch or any of the brokerage firms and have a preliminary meeting with an advisor and start the conversation about what to do. And you'll find that a great way to gather market intelligence, because you want to go to different people and hear what they have to say and then weigh those in the balance of your overall goals and objectives.
Okay, thank you.
How is it possible for the market to actually crash?
How is it possible for the market to actually crash? Well, the market is made up of investors, and investors have opinions about the sentiment related to particular stocks or the economy in general. And it is driven in large measure by that sentiment. Here recently, at the onset of 2020, when the pandemic began to take hold and businesses started to shut down, the investment sentiment at the time was that stocks were not going to bring the returns that they were slated to bring. So a lot of people wanted to exit stocks. And so what we call a herd mentality in the market, people ran for the exits. And when you have more and more people trying to sell at the same time, you got to have people on the other end willing to buy. And as people on the other end who are willing to buy, they see the panic in the market, they will wait. That drives investors to sell. I got to get rid of mine. I'll sell it for an even lower amount just to get rid of it. So that is kind of what causes the market to crash as well as rise, is all driven by investor sentiment and the outlook for companies with respect to their long-term net income generation. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, are there any other questions that anybody has? Any last minute things? If you don't feel comfortable speaking, you can always feel free to put it in the chat. Well, okay, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, Mr. Hoskins, for coming to speak with us, coming to answer our questions. It's been a really enlightening and really educational experience, and we definitely appreciate you bringing your expertise to help us learn more within this camp.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I would just close by saying, at one time I was you, and life has a way of grabbing hold of you, but the more you exercise prudence in the decisions that you make, better off you're going to be in the future. And if I could leave you with anything, I would just say, do your very level best to be educated in your decisions, and think about the long-term consequences, because they're there. And the more that you do to plan for the future, the better off you'll be in living the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So for the people, well, first we're going to stop recording.
So I'm gonna sign off now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.